gerrymandering. You can go to gerrymandering. Give me a second here. Now we can go to gerrymandering. Damn it. All right.
All right, Kathleen, what are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about redistricting. And before you fall asleep, hear me out. I think it's good. It's good to kind of know there's been a lot of headlines lately about redistricting in various states. And so our writing process, as you know briefly, we have like our writers and we have our advisors who come in and they read our stories and they're like, oh, from my perspective, partisan perspective, this looks good, or other perspective, this looks good. And the other day we had a redistricting story and they were going back and forth on some wording about something. And when we were trying to pick a topic for like, what have readers asked about, what don't we understand? All the writers were like, yeah, well, I didn't understand Matt and Will's conversation on that thread. And we were like, we don't understand redistricting. So we've heard from a couple readers too, but just what should we think when we hear redistricting in the headlines? That's what we're gonna talk about.
Okay, so let's start there. What is redistricting? Why does it happen? You know, we've seen it in the news, but on the 10-year cycle, why does that happen?
So you know more about it than you thought. 10 years cycle.
Well, yeah.
It does happen every 10 years. So first, this episode will be chock full of pop quizzes for you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, pop quiz. How many House members were in the first Congress?
The very first?
Yeah, so 13 states.
Let's go with 40.
Okay, 65.
Okay.
And then from there, I think that was 65 like allocated by the Constitution. And then from there, every 10 years, you would add reps based on how many, how the population had grown. So after the first census, 40 representatives got added, and it kept growing until 1929, when they were like, we can just keep growing forever. And they passed law that said there's only going to be 435 representatives, and to this day, there's 435 representatives. So the rub is kind of, in 1929, that meant that every representative represented like 280,000 people. Now, every representative represents like 760,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, so after every census, you have to look at the math and say, does my state need more districts based on some rules, or, how has the population shifted? And you do have to assess your congressional district map after every census. So that's why the 10 years.
Got it. So people are moving and relocating and maybe having babies, so the population grows and changes. So every 10 years the census is taken, we gotta update and refresh the maps and redistrict to make it proportionally correct and updated.
Yep.
Who is actually drawing the lines, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the state. So there's, I guess, 4-ish different ways that you can do it. So state legislatures can do it, which is kind of weird because then it's like the politicians that are benefiting from the map are the ones like drawing the lines.
Like conflict of interest, kind of.
Right. But that's the majority of states do that. I think somewhere around 30 states do that. Then you have independent commissions. So that would be like citizens or non-politicians, which sounds great. They draw the maps. Then there's also politician commissions, which is elected officials. That I know sounds less fair, maybe, on the surface, but they are bipartisan. This happens in Hawaii and New Jersey. So at least there is their aim is to be still fair. You have hybrid commissions. So actually Iowa is, the way it was described online, is uniquely respected. So you have like a commission that proposes a map, a nonpartisan commission, and then the legislature will vote on it. And so in Iowa, a nonpartisan agency draws the lines without looking at partisan data, and then the legislature can only say yes or no. They can't actually amend it. So there's an effort, to make it as fair as possible. But when that doesn't work, courts will step in and they will either strike down the map or tell them to try again, or sometimes draw the map themselves. So somebody has to keep them straight.
Yeah, okay, keeping them straight. There's different states do it differently. There's different people that are involved, different committees. You mentioned on principle, they still try to make it fair. Are there any standard rules that everyone has to play by?
The big three heavyweights. The most dramatic shifts happened in three massive states, which effectively engaged in a tit-for-tat redistricting battle to cancel each other out. Texas, +5 Republican. Following a push from National Party leadership, Texas held a special legislative session in August 2025 to heavily gerrymander their map. The new lines aggressively target Democratic incumbents and split urban voters, locking in 5 additional safe Republican seats. The U.S. Supreme Court cleared this map for use in December 2025. California, +5 Democrat. In direct retaliation to Texas, California Democrats successfully pushed Proposition 50 in a November 2025 special election. This temporarily suspended the state's independent redistricting commission, allowing the Democratic supermajority in the legislature to redraw the map. This netted Democrats 5 additional seats, effectively canceling out the Texas gains. Florida, +4 Republican. With Texas and California fighting to a draw, Florida became the tiebreaker. Governor Ron DeSantis signed a new map in May 2026 that aggressively targeted remaining Democratic strongholds, netting Republicans 4 additional safe seats. The rest of the board, while the big states grabbed the headlines, the remaining net gains for Republicans were cobbled together 1 or 2 seats at a time across the South and Midwest. Much of this was triggered by the Supreme Court's Calais ruling, which weakened the Voting Rights Act and gave southern states a green light to eliminate majority-minority districts. Ohio. The legislature passed a new map overriding previous court concerns, +2 Republican. Alabama. The Supreme Court allowed the state's 2023 map to be used, +1 Republican. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed a new map following the Calais decision, +1 Republican. Missouri. The legislature passed a new map to squeeze out a Democratic seat, +1 Republican. North Carolina. The legislature enacted a new map to shore up GOP advantages, +1 Republican. Tennessee Governor Bill Lee signed a new map cracking a Democratic district, +1 Republican. Utah. A state court intervened to approve a plaintiff-drawn map, +1 Democrat. The bottom line. Across the 10 states that successfully implemented new maps for 2026, the net result is a +1 O-seat advantage for the GOP. To win control of the House, Democrats now have to overcome a baked-in 10-seat deficit. Mathematically, this means they cannot just win the national popular vote by a point or two. They need a massive uniform wave election just to break even. The short answer is yes, but it requires a massive, historically rare wave election. If citizens restrict themselves to only voting for candidates on a rigged map, they are fighting a mathematical uphill battle. Gerrymandering is specifically designed to absorb normal fluctuations in voter turnout and enthusiasm. Here is why simply voting your way out of a gerrymandered map is so difficult, along with the 2 ways voters can actually break the system. How gerrymanders absorb high turnout. Computer-generated maps are stress-tested against past election data to ensure they hold up, even if the opposing party has a great year. They neutralize high voter turnout in 2 ways. The wasted vote trap. Packing. If you are a voter in a packed district, your party was already designed to win by a landslide. If a massive get-out-the-vote campaign increases your party's vote share in that district from 75% to 85%, those extra votes do absolutely nothing. They are mathematically wasted because they don't translate to additional seats. The unreachable margin, cracking. In cracked districts, mapmakers typically build a comfortable 10 to 15-point buffer for the favored party. If the disadvantaged party has a massive surge in turnout and shifts the vote by 8 points, they still lose the district. They went from getting crushed to losing a nail-biter, but the result is exactly the same: 0 representation. The exception, the dummy-mander. There is one scenario where simply voting for candidates can break a gerrymander: when mapmakers get too greedy. When politicians try to maximize their advantage, they often spread their own voters as thinly as possible across many districts to win as many seats as they can. For example, instead of drawing 3 safe districts where they win by 20 points, they might draw 5 precarious districts where they win by only 3 or 4 points. Political scientists call this a dummy-mander. If the national mood shifts just a few points against the party in power, or if voter turnout for the opposition spikes unexpectedly, that thin armor shatters. Because they spread their voters so thin, a small wave election can suddenly flip all of those narrow districts, causing the gerrymander to backfire spectacularly. The real solution: voting on the rules. If citizens are doomed by only voting for candidates, their most powerful weapon is changing what they are voting on. The most successful anti-gerrymandering victories of the last decade didn't come from outvoting a rigged map. They came from ballot initiatives. In states that allow citizen-led ballot propositions, voters have bypassed state legislatures entirely to fix the system. Michigan, 2018. Citizens collected hundreds of thousands of signatures to put Proposal 2 on the ballot, voting to strip the legislature of its map-drawing power and give it to an independent citizens commission. Ohio, 2015 and 2018. Voters overwhelmingly passed constitutional amendments to curb partisan map drawing, though enforcing them has resulted in ongoing legal battles. Ultimately, if a map is rigged to withstand a 6-point shift in the popular vote, simply telling people to vote harder for their local representative rarely works. To actually overcome it by voting, citizens usually have to use direct democracy to rewrite the rules of the game.
So there are, but they're kind of vague. Okay, you have to redistrict every 10 years if the math adds up. But essentially, the districts need to be equal in population. It also, I guess importantly for this conversation, doesn't say you only have to do it every 10 years, just at minimum every 10 years. So every census, if you gain or lose seats, so if you have a different number of districts, you have to redraw. If your population shifts, you have to redraw. But this all comes down to equal protection, equal representation from the 14th Amendment and from a 1960s court case. So essentially, this made sense to me, so hopefully it helps. If another district, if you live in another district and your district has 2 times as many people as my district, then effectively your vote is worth half of my vote.
Right.
So they want it to be fair to where everybody's getting equal representation, equal protection of the law. So the rules, you have to have equal population. You have to have continuity, so it can't just have like floating islands. Okay. No racial discrimination, no discrimination against protected classes, and that's it.
Oh.
Federal rules. Now there are state rules. So
Right.
some state rules say their wording can kind of be like, oh, it has to be compact in theory, like it can't just be this sprawling district. You have to have respect for political boundaries, so try not to like split counties or cities. Keep communities of interest together, so if it's like a college town, don't split the district down the middle of the college town, or like a farming region. And then some states do require districts to be politically competitive, but most don't. So that's kind of interesting.
Gotcha. Okay. Can we go to gerrymandering?
We can go to gerrymandering.
Let's go.
Gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering.
So we've actually discussed gerrymandering before. One of our I actually think it was our first recorded TPO Explains.
Yeah.
So we can link to that too.
We can check our
it's
archives.
funny.
It's way back there.
Check our character art. I think I'm wearing the same color. We're probably wearing something very similar. So when we were first testing this format, we talked about gerrymandering because it was in the news then. It's in the news now. Gerrymandering is when you're drawing a political map for partisan gain. So I'm putting the lines around somewhere to say, I want this district to be heavily Republican or Democrat. Not illegal.
Let's go into it.
Let's do it.
Why? Because it just sounds so unfair and illegal, but it's not.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
So the rules, I told you the rules. None of the rules say that you can't look at partisan data whenever you're drawing these lines. You can't look at racial data and let that be the reason behind the lines that you've drawn.
But Republicans are not a protected class. So you could look at that demographic.
Right. So the, I guess, loophole is as long as you can claim that partisan advantage was incidental rather than the goal, then courts have not really been able to strike that down. So gerrymandering happens a lot. I think a lot more than we realized. There was I mentioned this in the last episode too, an early 2000s study that said only 10% of districts are what you would consider competitive, which means only 10% are not gerrymandered.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow, yes.
The reason why it matters more now, so let's say 20, 30 years ago, sure, maybe there was gerrymandering going on, but people weren't as politically polarized. So even if you did have majority Republicans in a district, more people might vote more moderately or, be willing to cross the aisle, and that just doesn't happen as much anymore. And so if you have a Republican district, like, it is a safe district for that, Republican representative.
Right.
The different ways you can do gerrymandering, as a recap: cracking, hacking, hijacking, kidnapping. Now is it all ringing a bell?
Yeah.
So you can, if you have like a big group of Democratic voters, for example, you can crack them up, and not by telling jokes, and put a little bit of them in each district to dilute their vote. Or you could just say, all right, we're just gonna draw the line kind of wonky and have all the Democrats in one district. That way there's just one Democratic district and the rest of them are Republican. And then a couple other ways, like if you had a Democratic incumbent and you were like, well, let's just redraw the district so that he's not in it anymore and now he can't be the representative. And then of course the issue with that is feeling like your vote's wasted, like if you're a minority voter and in a different district. So
Yeah,
gerrymandering.
yes, I remember when you first introduced that in the previous episode we talked about it. Just the terms sound so violent.
They do.
Yeah, but speaking of terms, it is important, I think, for the new listeners that haven't checked out that episode. We did talk about where the word gerrymandering, or you allude to gerrymandering,
Yes, very
came
important.
from. So let's talk about that too.
Yes. Okay. Bear with me. There's this guy. His name is Elbridge Gerry, but it's spelled Gerry. But it's said Gary.
Gary.
All right. When he was governor of Massachusetts, he signed a redistricting bill that was gerrymandering. And a local newspaper looked at the map. We can put this up on the screen, but this is what it looked like. They added some feet to it and said it looked like a salamander, and then they called it gerrymandering. And I don't know where along the lines, people just started saying gerrymandering instead of gerrymandering. But not only did he also didn't really want this bill to get passed. He only said yes because his party, peer pressured him into it. Yeah. And so not only did he not want this bill to get passed, but now he's known for it. And we don't even say his name right. So that's Elbridge Gerry.
Yes, just like...
Founding father of gerrymandering. Poor guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's gerrymandering.
Thank you.
Yep, not illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Not
is
illegal.
just, it sounds illegal, but it's not. And then, so there's no federal, let's clarify, there's no federal ban on partisan gerrymandering. Can't racially gerrymander. But there are states that have it in their constitution that you can't, or in their state legislatures that have said you cannot do partisan gerrymandering.
Oh.
So a few states have. Florida, Ohio, Colorado, Michigan, New York, all have state rules against it. So.
Okay, you mentioned Florida, and a recent TPO email newsletter got sent out and podcast episode where Florida was mentioned. I want to bring this to current state. Why are we seeing maps get redrawn in the middle of the decade? It's 2026. It's not a census year.
No.
So what's going on right now?
Yeah, okay, it all started last year, the summer of 2025, with Texas. So before 2025, guess how many states had conducted voluntary mid-decade redistricting since 1970?
Before 2025, since 1970, there have been 10.
2. Ooh. Yeah, and now we have 13 that are in some state of redistricting before the 2026 midterms.
Wow.
There's no rules against it. It just hasn't been done. But then Texas kind of broke the seal, and they're like, well, we're going to do it. And it started this domino effect of Texas redraws their maps, which would net, I think it's 5 GOP seats. So then California's like, well, we're going to redraw ours and give the Democrats 5 seats. So it's just, now there's all these different states who are in some various, whether they've approved the map or the maps, being voted on, they're in different states of getting a new congressional map. But the weird part is, I think, as it's projected right now, it would still be a net, maybe 10 Democratic seats would be gained and 9 Republican seats would be gained. So they're still going to offset.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. But I mean, The reason why it's important right now is because there's already a thin margin in Congress, and so just watching that
every seat counts,
right?
Even though it's razor thin, or because it's razor thin margins, even a net one party gets an added extra that can make the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're saying redistricting could actually move the needle in the House?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because it could come down to like the primary then. If you think that certain seats are protected or not, then really it comes down to, well, then who's the person, the candidate that for that party that you're putting in that seat. So then the primary becomes more important. And then, I don't know, there are people who will say that that becomes an issue because it's going to be the more polarizing candidates that are going to get all the publicity for the primary. So then we're just electing polarizing people into these positions that are guaranteed positions. And then we have a gridlocked Congress. So, yeah, I think it can definitely move the needle. It's important to pay attention to, especially if like your district is one that's getting redistricted. Yeah, it's not a perfect system. The midterms are coming up. That's why we're hearing about it a lot. So this, the House of Representatives, the entire House is reelected or up for reelection every 2 years. So every seat will be voted on this fall. We'll have a lot of information for you in our midterm hub coming up this fall.
Great plug.
Spoiler alert.
Love it. Well, Kathleen, this has really helped me visualize the context of everything that's going on right now. And we're going to continue to see this happen. Yeah. So the visualization, the context of it, this is really helpful.
Okay, I have visuals for you.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do. So to show you, have you ever looked at a map of Iowa? We can put these on the screen.
I have.
Look how there's so many schools. Like our counties are just very proportional. Iowa has 4 districts, and you can see they're just like pretty. It's pretty cut and dry, those are the districts. But some of the ones that you'll hear about in the news, like this is Illinois, and it gets a little bit more inflated when most of Illinois' districts are parts of Chicago.
Yes.
And so they're trying to make equal, and so you have to go and like pull from Chicago and then pull from the outskirts of Chicago.
Yes.
So then we have Texas, so you can see same thing there. They're cutting up these big cities to try and get population. I mean, it kind of like, it's just, it gets very complicated. I do not envy the people who are trying to draw these maps. Same thing with Virginia and California. So my question for you, my game for you.
A game?
Yes. You can play along at home. I have 4 pictures here.
Okay.
Which one do you think is not a congressional district?
What? Okay, let me check.
Doodle or district? That's the game.
Doodle or district? No context. Just doodle or district.
Doodle or district.
Okay. Is B?
No. C is a doodle. And you can see right here, there's a little island. Remember? No islands allowed.
Oh. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
should have been listening to the rules. Won't be on a congressional redistricting committee anytime soon. Isn't that crazy? These are real districts.
That is crazy. It looks
like a doodle. Yeah.
You got me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thanks for playing my game.
Yeah, thanks for the game. Love it. All right. Should we move on to Christian perspective?
Yeah. With this one, I'm going eternal perspective. I mean, again, Iowa, our districts seem very cut and dry, but this idea that like lines are getting redrawn and there are people who are like, almost manipulating the lines. I don't know. It just helped me to think about our hope is not in maps or elections or fair representation. We can't put our hope in those things. They're good things to want, but Christians have to remember that our citizenship here is temporary. And so keep your eyes on God and eternity and someone with whom we do have true representation in Jesus.
Wow. Wow.
You like
Amen. I love that. Wow. What a way to close.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Kathleen. On a refresher for me on this topic.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks everyone for joining us on another episode of TPO Explains. As a reminder, you can watch this episode on YouTube and Spotify. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. And remember, check out Moms, Dads, and Grads and fill out that listener survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts there. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time.
Bye.
Gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the deliberate manipulation of electoral district boundaries to give one political party or group an electoral advantage while diluting the voting power of the opposition. It is one of the oldest political strategies in American history, transforming over 2 centuries from crude map drawing to a highly sophisticated, data-driven science. Here is a deep dive into the mechanics, history, and legal battles surrounding gerrymandering. The mechanics, cracking, and packing. Before diving into history, it is essential to understand how maps are manipulated. Every 10 years, following the U.S. Census, states must redraw their legislative and congressional districts to ensure equal population sizes. When politicians control this process, they rely on 2 primary mathematical techniques. Cracking, spreading opposition voters thinly across many districts. This prevents them from achieving a majority in any single district, effectively neutralizing their voting power. Packing, concentrating as many opposition voters as possible into a single district. While the opposition will win that specific district overwhelmingly, their votes are wasted there, allowing the controlling party to easily win the surrounding, more competitive districts. A timeline of electoral manipulation. The history of gerrymandering is largely a story of escalating political tactics, followed by citizens and courts attempting to establish guardrails. The Salamander District, 1812. Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry signs a redistricting bill to favor his Democratic-Republican Party over the Federalists. One of the newly drawn districts in Essex County is so bizarrely shaped that the Boston Gazette publishes a cartoon depicting it as a mythical salamander with claws and wings. The newspaper dubs it the gerrymander, and the portmanteau permanently enters the political lexicon. Baker versus Carr, 1962. For over a century, courts largely stayed out of redistricting disputes. This changed when the Supreme Court ruled that redistricting is a justiciable issue, meaning federal courts have the authority to intervene when maps violate the Constitution. This paved the way for the one-person, one-vote standard, forcing states to draw districts with roughly equal populations. The Voting Rights Act, 1965. A crown jewel of the civil rights movement, the VRA targets systemic voter suppression. Section 2 and Section 5 of the Act become critical legal tools to combat racial gerrymandering, the practice of deliberately drawing maps to disenfranchise Black, Hispanic, and other minority voters. Thornburg versus Gingles, 1986. The Supreme Court establishes specific criteria for analyzing claims of minority vote dilution. The ruling mandates that mapmakers cannot draw lines that immediately impair the ability of marginalized groups to elect their preferred representatives, leading to the creation of majority-minority districts. Shaw versus Reno, 1993. The Supreme Court places limits on how heavily race can factor into map drawing. In reviewing a North Carolina district that was so narrow it famously followed the contours of Interstate 85, the court rules that districts drawn predominantly on the basis of race, resulting in bizarre, unexplainable shapes, violate the Equal Protection Clause. The Algorithmic Era, 2010. Following the 2010 census, redistricting enters a new technological epoch. Using advanced geographic information systems, GIS, block-level demographic data, and powerful algorithms, mapmakers are able to execute surgical gerrymanders. This era proves that computers can generate districts that look perfectly normal on a map, but mathematically guarantee lopsided partisan outcomes. Rucho versus Common Cause, 2019. In a landmark 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court radically alters the redistricting landscape. Chief Justice John Roberts writes that while partisan gerrymandering may be, quote, incompatible with democratic principles, federal courts lack the jurisdiction to rule on it because it is a, quote, political question. The modern battleground, the 2019 Rucho versus Common Cause decision, essentially created a 2-tiered legal reality for redistricting. Racial gerrymandering, still strictly prohibited and subject to federal court review under the Voting Rights Act and the Equal Protection Clause. Partisan gerrymandering, off limits to federal courts. It is entirely legal at the federal level to draw districts intended to decimate a rival political party. Because federal courts will no longer intervene in partisan disputes, the fight has shifted entirely to the state level. In recent years, challenges to unfair maps have been brought before state Supreme Courts, relying on the Equal Protection Clauses found in state constitutions. Furthermore, to combat the inherent conflict of interest in letting politicians choose their own voters, several states, such as Arizona, California, and Michigan, have completely stripped their state legislatures of redistricting power. Instead, they have handed the process over to independent redistricting commissions, bipartisan or nonpartisan citizen panels designed to prioritize geographic compactness and community preservation over political dominance. In April 2026, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling that fundamentally altered the Voting Rights Act, VRA, and the legal framework surrounding racial gerrymandering. Here is what changed this year. Louisiana versus Calais, April 2026. On April 29, 2026, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in Louisiana versus Calais, a case concerning a newly drawn congressional map in Louisiana. The decision effectively dismantled Section 2 of the VRA, the primary legal tool historically used to prevent mapmakers from diluting the voting power of minority groups. The court ruled that mapmakers can draw districts that dilute minority voting power as long as they can argue their primary motivation was partisan advantage, not racial discrimination. The immediate fallout. Because race and partisan affiliation are heavily correlated in American politics, distinguishing between the two is exceptionally difficult. The Calais decision triggered several major consequences. Higher evidentiary hurdles. Plaintiffs challenging a map for racial discrimination now face a nearly impossible legal standard. If a state defends a discriminatory map by claiming it is simply a legal partisan gerrymander, federal courts will likely allow it to stand. Mid-cycle redistricting. The ruling has set off a rush of mid-cycle map drawing ahead of the 2026 midterms. Following the decision, states like Louisiana and Florida immediately moved to pass new maps that eliminate or alter majority-minority districts, shifting boundaries to favor the controlling political party. The gutting of the VRA, voting rights advocates and dissenting justices, noted that this decision functionally renders Section 2 of the VRA inoperable for redistricting. When combined with the 2013 Shelby County versus Holder decision, which effectively ended Section 5's pre-clearance requirement, the VRA has been largely stripped of its power to regulate election maps at the federal level. This 2026 ruling firmly closes the loop opened by the 2019 Rucho versus Common Cause decision. With federal courts refusing to police partisan gerrymandering, and now allowing states to justify racial gerrymandering under the guise of partisanship, the legal battlefield for fair maps has moved almost entirely to state supreme courts and independent redistricting commissions.
Pretty wide historical perspective,
Gerrymandering, aka redistricting, what does it mean? Why are people upset at Governor Abbott from Texas? He's going to be gerrymandering. He's going to be redistricting. You know what? I'm Newsom. I'm going to be doing it as well. If you do it, I'm going to do that to the state of California. And then Pritzker gets in there, and then they're like, I should have gone in there because the people really realize what we're doing in Illinois. This is not good. So what is gerrymandering? Let me give you an idea. So this is something they get to do once every 10 years when census gives the reports of population, blacks, whites, Asians, Middle Eastern, Democrats, Republicans, and they get to say, well, this is this district, this is what this district looks like. If you look at Illinois, this is what Illinois used to look like back in the day. If you look at it, these are basic districts. You see how they're like right next to each other, right? This is what Illinois looks like today. Look at the way they're doing the district, specifically that one district you're looking at, it's Illinois' 4th district. They call it the earmuffs because there's no way you can mess it up that way. Why would you do it that way? But what they do is they mix them up and they take a majority district of Republicans or Democrats and they'll try to separate them into different districts to lower the percentage so they can win the additional. It's actually very, very creative. Done by every state. This is not a Republican or a Democratic thing, but this is something that's been going on and it's something you ought to know about. We're going to talk about that today. So if you get value out of this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. So watch this. This is Illinois. When you look at Illinois, this is how much, when you see the red, that's areas that Republicans live in. Now, if you look at the state, you would say, well, it looks half and half Republican and Democrat. If that's the case, why is it that out of the 17 seats that they have at the House level, 17, 14 are Democrats, only 3 are Republicans. When they voted the state, 55% or so were Democrats, 45% were Republicans, but because of gerrymandering, 84% of the entire state's representatives are on the left, and only 16% are Republican, 3 out of 17, simply because of gerrymandering. That should kind of give you an idea. Now let's go back to the history of it. How did this name come about? There used to be a governor in Massachusetts back in 1812 called Elbridge Gerry. This guy was the first one to say, well, what if I'm able to redistrict in a way? And he did the district in a salamander. If you look at this, this is exactly what he did. This makes no sense to create this as a district. And then they said, wait a minute, this is brilliant. Gerry, salamander, gerrymandering. That's how the name came about, right? This guy had a brilliant idea. Everybody said, we're going to do this. This guy was part of the old Democratic Republican Party is what they used to call it, pre-Lincoln. So it breaks down into 3 different types of gerrymandering. One of them is partisan gerrymandering. It's purely based on politics. Hey, you're Republican. We're going to kind of cut this area out because there's too many rich Republicans here. We're going to cut this Democrats out because there's too many of them. We're going to district it. Or number two is racial gerrymandering. Too many whites here. Too many blacks here. Let's split them apart. Let's split them apart on what they're going to be. Or last but not least is the bipartisan gerrymandering. Doesn't happen often, but some of them who do it, it's bipartisan. It benefits everybody. So you may ask, why would somebody do this? Very simple. It reduces competition. If Illinois is able to do what they did, Democrats have a hard time winning. By the way, those are numbers for Illinois we're talking about. California is very similar. In California, Newsom is threatening, saying, if Governor Abbott goes out there and does what he does, I'm going to lower the Republican seats, which is roughly 17% in the state of California. They have 83% of it. Let me say this one more time. California is going to flip. California is going to flip. Well, unless you can flip the gerrymandering that's going on today and make it bipartisan, they're going to have control for a long time. 83% seats are controlled by the left. Only 17% are controlled by the right. He wants to bring it down to 8% if Abbott pursues with the gerrymandering that he's about to be doing right now. So now that threat is a real threat to go from 17 to 8, but this is what happened in Texas. In Texas, the Senate passed a redistricting map, and the Senate who approved this, they voted on this, the senators of Texas, the state senators, they voted 19-2. 9 Democratic senators walked out in protest. They didn't even show up because they knew they were going to lose. The map is designed to add up to 5 GOP seats while eliminating or weakening several Democratic ones, potentially flipping districts held by figures like Representative Jasmine Crockett. That's why she made a comment yesterday. You can't get rid of me. I ain't going nowhere. But that's one of the people they're going after. Republicans argue it's necessary to reflect population shifts and counter perceived Democratic advantages elsewhere, but critics call it partisan gerrymandering. Obviously, this is going to frustrate a lot of people on the left, especially in the state of Texas, because they've been trying to take over state for a while. So many of them are upset they left. They went to states like Illinois. Some of them went to New York, Massachusetts. More than 50 House Democrats from Texas have left those places. And Governor Abbott comes out and authorize civil arrest warrants for absent lawmakers and threaten special sessions over and over until the Democrats return. And Attorney General Ken Paxton is exploring legal options to vacate the absent member seats. Chaotic of this taking place in Texas. Now, if we look at the numbers, California 83-17, right? If we look at Illinois 84-16, the amount of gerrymandering going on in California, Illinois, a lot of these states. If you go to Texas, this is what it looks like right now. For Texas, out of 38 representatives, 25 are Republicans, 66%. 13 are Democrats, 34%. Nothing near where it's at in California or Illinois. But of course, this gerrymandering is upsetting anybody and everybody. Why? I'm going to go back to the point. What are the effects of gerrymandering? Reduced competition, increased polarization, skewed policy outcomes. Some may say this is exactly what's going to be happening in Texas. So obviously a lot of people are losing their minds. Pritzker goes on Stephen Colbert, goes on the Kristen Welker show, and let me tell you, what Abbott is doing. And then everybody says, well, this is your district, and you've been kind of doing this. So what do you have to say about the fact, because you have the worst gerrymander? Well, yeah, but what they're doing is because our people voted for this. And then Kathy Hochul is calling it insurrection. This is the governor from New York, and the best one is by Texas State Representative Jolanda Jones. Compared it to the Holocaust. That's what they're comparing it to. Okay, this is her saying it, not me saying it. She's saying this is what compared it to. Let me continue with you so you can understand what's going on. This is Maryland, District 3. Take a look at this one here. Tell me if this makes any sense. This is like the ultimate example of what gerrymandering looks like. Here's Pennsylvania, District 7. Look at Pennsylvania's District 7. So somebody may be watching and say, well, that's unfair, Pat. I don't care what happens. The Texas cannot be doing something like this. I said, well, maybe there's a reason for it. Because when they do this, the census gives a report every 10 years. Most states, you can gerrymander as many times as you want because there's no federal authority on this. The federal government doesn't get to say anything about this. The governor, the local, the representative, the Senate, they vote for it. And if you got control over it, you can do it all you want. There are some states, they can only do it once a decade. Carolina is once a decade. Some states, about 6 or 7 states, they can only do it once a decade. Some even you can only gerrymander or redistrict it on the year that ends with the number 1. So 2021, 2031, 2041. But all the other states, guess what? Gerrymander all you want. But Republicans are upset because they're saying the following. Well, in 2020, when he gave us a census, you overcounted Democratic states and you undercounted Republican states. So some are arguing that part, that maybe there was some advantages there. Let me read some of the numbers here. See how you look at this map here? See how it says green and there's purple? Green are the states that were overcounted, and purple are the states that were undercounted. Let me give you some of the numbers. Hawaii was overcounted by 6.8%, okay? New York, population 19 million, overcounted by 3.4%. That's somewhere around 700,000 people, the size of an entire congressional district, which means they could have one additional seat just because of this overcounting. It's a big deal when you look at it. Massachusetts overcounted by 2.2%. Minnesota overcounted by 3.8%. Delaware and Rhode Island were also overcounted. Out of all the states that were overcounted, if you look at this list here, and by the way, of the overcounted states, Utah and Ohio were the only ones that got overcounted. All the other ones that got overcounted were all on the Democratic states. And the undercounted states, very interesting when you look at the numbers here, look at that. Arkansas, 5%. Tennessee, 4.8%. Mississippi, 4.1%. Florida, minus 3.5%. Texas, minus 1.9%. Undercounted. In this case, to be fair, we have to also show that Illinois was minus 2% undercounted. So when you look at these numbers here, some people could say, wait a minute. You're doing this, you're forcing us to have to protect our state because we know the Democrats are targeting taking over Texas, because once they take over Texas, guess what? Democrats could win year after year after year presidential election. It's a massive state to take over and take control of. So a lot of people on the right are concerned. Now, President Trump's a little bit concerned about this long term because he's trying to see what's going to happen next in 2028, 2032. What about these 15 million illegal immigrants that came in the last 4 years under Joe Biden? Do you count them towards the census? According to the 14th Amendment, it's yes. It tells us U.S. Constitution requires that congressional appointment be based on the whole number of persons in each state, with no distinction between citizens and non-citizens, but the president and his team is going to try to do something about it if they do, say they succeed. Here's the differences it would make. Okay, it would lower representation for states with large unauthorized populations, such as California, 1.8 million, even Texas, 1.6 million, and Florida, 1.2 million, but a lot of people on the other side said that's not going to happen simply because of the 14th Amendment that we have in place. Hopefully now you have a better idea what gerrymandering and redistricting is. If you want all these notes and the research that our team did, all you have to do is go to Manek, download the app, go to the PBD Entrepreneur Circle, it's $5 a month, you'll get all the notes in there, and the community talks to each other, you get all these notes, click on this QR code, download the app, you'll have those notes there for you. And if you enjoyed this video, we did another video since a lot of people may be saying, well, maybe it's time for a third party. Elon Musk was talking about America's party he wants to start. If you've not seen it, maybe click here. The video will be here for you to watch. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye, bye-bye.
Efforts to eliminate gerrymandering, the practice of drawing electoral boundaries to favor one political party or demographic, have shifted dramatically in recent years. Because the U.S. Supreme Court has largely closed the door on federal court interventions, the battle has migrated to independent state commissions, state-level constitutional lawsuits, and pushes for sweeping federal legislation. Before diving into the legal and political efforts, it helps to see exactly what reformers are trying to stop. Politicians manipulate maps primarily through two tactics: packing, cramming an opponent's voters into a few districts so they win by a landslide but lose everywhere else, and cracking, spreading an opponent's voters across multiple districts so their influence is diluted. Here is a breakdown of the current strategies being used to combat gerrymandering nationwide. The federal court barrier. A major reason anti-gerrymandering efforts have moved to the state level is because the federal avenue has been significantly narrowed by recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions. Partisan gerrymandering is non-justiciable. In the landmark Rucho v. Common Cause 2019 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that federal courts cannot police partisan gerrymandering. The court decided that settling political map disputes is outside the jurisdiction of federal judges, no matter how egregious the partisan skew. Narrowing of racial protections. Historically, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act was used to strike down maps that diluted minority voting power. However, recent rulings like Alexander v. South Carolina NAACP 2024 and Louisiana v. Calais 2026 have raised the evidentiary burden. Plaintiffs now face steeper hurdles to prove intentional racial discrimination, with the court often requiring them to definitively disentangle racial motives from pure partisan politics. Independent Redistricting Commissions (IRCs). To remove the inherent conflict of interest of politicians picking their own voters, about 20 states have transferred map drawing power to independent or bipartisan commissions. However, data from the 2020 redistricting cycle shows that their success depends entirely on their structural design. The gridlock problem. Commissions composed of an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, such as those in New York and Virginia, often suffer from total partisan paralysis. Without a tie-breaking mechanism, these commissions frequently deadlock and fail to pass maps. The tiebreaker model, the most successful commissions, like those in California and Michigan, include a specific block of independent or non-affiliated voters alongside Democrats and Republicans. This structure disperses responsibility and forces compromise. Binding authority. For an IRC to be effective, its maps must carry the force of law. In states where commissions are merely advisory, they often fail. For example, in Utah, a bipartisan commission agreed on a fair map, but the state legislature successfully overrode it to pass an aggressively gerrymandered alternative. State Supreme Court battles. With federal courts stepping back, voting rights advocates are increasingly utilizing state constitutions to strike down rigged maps. Explicit state bans. States like Florida, Ohio, and New York have amended their constitutions to expressly forbid partisan gerrymandering, providing a direct legal mechanism to sue in state court. General constitutional protections. In states like Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Alaska, state Supreme Courts have struck down heavily gerrymandered maps by interpreting broad state constitutional guarantees, such as the right to free and equal elections. Neutral criteria laws. Some states mandate strict geographic rules, requiring districts to be compact, contiguous, and respectful of local county lines. A recent extreme partisan map in Wisconsin was struck down by the state Supreme Court simply because its districts violated the contiguity rule. Proposed federal legislation. Advocates argue that relying on a patchwork of state laws and commissions leaves millions of voters unprotected. The primary national effort is the Freedom to Vote Act, currently stalled in Congress. If passed, it would overhaul the process nationwide by banning partisan gerrymandering. The law would explicitly prohibit any state from implementing a congressional redistricting plan that intentionally or effectively favors one political party. Establishing mathematical thresholds. It creates a legal presumption against any map that yields a partisan advantage greater than 7%, or one full congressional seat, utilizing standard quantitative tools like PlanScore to evaluate a state's past election data. Streamlining legal challenges. The bill would give the U.S. Attorney General and individual citizens a direct path to sue in federal court over unfair maps, effectively bypassing the Rucho decision by establishing a clear federal statute.
This is why I usually watch videos on level 3 difficulty. It is not
So,
easy
you want to know what gerrymandering is? First, let's start with Government 101. In the United States, each state elects a certain number of representatives based on the state's population. The larger your population, the more representatives you have. Each representative represents a district, or a geographical area including its voters. Ideally, we want to have a range of representatives who reflect the political views of the population across the state. But how do we decide who gets to vote for each representative? Let's look at an example. Suppose we have a very tiny state of 50 people. 30 of them belong to the blue party, and 20 belong to the red party. And just our luck, they all live in a nice even grid with blues on one side of the state and reds on the other. Now, let's say we need to divide the state into 5 districts. Each district will send one representative to the House to represent the people. Fortunately, because our citizens live in a neatly ordered grid, it's easy to draw 5 lengthy districts, 2 for the reds and 3 for the blues. Voila! Perfectly proportional representation, just as the founders intended. Now, let's say instead that the blue party controls the state government, and they get to decide how the lines are drawn. Rather than draw districts horizontally, they draw them vertically, so that in each district there are 6 blues and 4 reds. With a comfortable blue majority in the state, each district elects a blue candidate to the House. The blues win 5 seats, and the reds don't get a single one. Well, finally, what if the red party controls the state government? The reds know they're at a numerical disadvantage. But with some creative boundary drawing, they can slice the blue population up such that they only get a majority in 2 districts. So despite making up 40% of the population, the Reds win 60% of the seats. Not bad. This process of redrawing district lines to give an advantage to one party over another is called gerrymandering, and it's nothing new. The term gerrymander is named after early 19th century Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry, who redrew the map of the Senate's districts in 1810 in order to weaken the opposing Federalist Party. Our example is, of course, a huge simplification. In the real world, people don't live in neatly ordered grids sorted by political party. But for politicians looking to give themselves an advantage at redistricting time, the process is exactly the same, and the consequences are very real. Gerrymandering is at least partly to blame for lopsided representation in the House seen in recent elections. And, it's been argued by the President, for political polarization, since representatives don't have to compromise hardline views in order to win seats.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today I'm going to talk about a topic in American politics that tends to drive people crazy! No, it's not partisanship or horse race journalism or the state of political punditry, although we could easily do episodes on all 3 of those, and we might. No, today we're going to look at the election districts and how they shape electoral outcomes, and that means, you guessed it, we're going to talk about gerrymandering.
Thank goodness, gerrymandering is a blight on our American election system. It completely thwarts the will of the majority, and it's responsible for our lopsided House of Representatives.
Not so fast, my left-wing sore loser friend. Gerrymandering is not nearly as responsible for the 2014 Republican Congress as the fact that people like you self-segregated into urban enclaves of socialism. All right, calm down, clones. Gerrymandering is a little more nuanced than that. Let's talk it out. Congressional apportionment, how many representatives each state gets, is super exciting, even though it only changes every 10 years. Since the number of representatives each state gets is based on population, it's important to know how many people are in each state. That's one reason, at least in the Constitution, that we have a census every 10 years. The most populous state, California, has the largest number of representatives, 53, and the least populous states have only 1. Sorry, Alaska, Delaware, the Dakotas, Vermont, Wyoming, and Montana, and the state of loneliness. One is loneliness. In those sparsely populated states, figuring out the election district, which geographic area is represented by a congressman, is easy because there's only 1 district. This makes elections in these states effectively at-large elections, like a state's choice for senator. Even though there are 2 senators from each state, they represent the entire state at large rather than only a part of it, like representatives are supposed to do. The Electoral College, the system through which Americans choose their president, are also a type of at-large election. The rest of the states are divided into what are called single-member districts. This means that each election district chooses 1 representative. Now, you might think it would be simple to divide a state into as many pieces as it has representatives, but why would you think that? Nothing is simple. Districts are required to be equal, or almost equal, in population, and in most states, populations are not evenly distributed across the entire region. The notion that election districts must encompass equal population is the essence of the idea of 1 person, 1 vote, a principle that was cast into law by the 1962 Supreme Court decision in Baker versus Carr. It means that a person's vote counts equally no matter where they live, at least as far as the House of Representatives goes. In the Senate, it doesn't actually work out because the resident of a small state like Delaware has the same number of senators, 2, as a resident of California. To put it another way, in 2014, 2 senators represented 897,934 Delawareans, and the same number of senators represented approximately 38 million Californians. In the House, each representative is responsible for about 700,000 to 800,000 people, which is still a lot, but much better than 1 senator for 19 million Californians or 13 million Texans. The idea that people should be equally represented in Congress shouldn't be controversial, and for the most part, it's not. What is controversial is the way that minority groups are represented. One of the problems with single-member districts is that they can make it easier to cut minority groups out of the political landscape. After all, if in a given state only 15% of the residents are minorities, it will be more difficult for them to elect a member of their own group, even under a plurality rule, unless that person can appeal to a large number of non-minority people. Congress and the Supreme Court have tried to remedy this problem by mandating that there be majority-minority districts, which is a confusing way of saying districts where the majority of voters are members of a minority group. This is a little like affirmative action in the realm of voting, and as you might have guessed, there's a fair amount of disagreement among people who think a lot about it, although I bet that number itself is a pretty small minority. This idea of majority-minority districts leads us into a really fun aspect of congressional districting, the way that the districts themselves are drawn, a process known as gerrymandering after the 19th century political cartoon that depicted one particular Massachusetts district that looked like a reptile. Oh, there it is. It looks like a dragon or something. And we all know dragons are reptiles. The man responsible for this twisted district, the name of my band in high school, was Elbridge Gerry, hence the name gerrymander. So districts have to be drawn in a way that they contain roughly equal populations. So why does it matter if they look convoluted or even somewhat ridiculous, like this? Well, states don't just draw districts to make them equal in population. They draw them to capture certain population characteristics so that one party has a greater chance of electing a member from a particular district. In the district pictured here, the Illinois 4th, Chicago has been carved up to capture a certain population. Me. That's the district I live in. Usually districts are drawn so that they can capture my vote, or a significant majority of one party or the other, virtually ensuring that a particular district will elect only a Democrat or Republican, as the case may be. You might have noticed that thin strip on the Illinois 4th's western edge connecting the upper half and the lower half. Look carefully and you'll see that it runs along the interstate, which I'm sure means that it has a huge population. Why do we do this? Because one of the requirements according to federal election law is that districts not only be roughly the same size in terms of population, but also that they be contiguous, meaning that they can't be divided completely by other districts. This requirement results in some pretty weird configurations. So who draws these cockamamie districts anyway? Well, they're done by state legislatures. Well, not legislatures themselves, but by people working at the behest of legislatures. If one party has a majority of the state legislature, say the Democrats, they usually want to draw the districts so that Democrats have a better chance of winning. Republicans do the same thing. This is why state legislature elections matter so much in census years. Whoever wins that year gets to redraw the districts. A couple of things to note here. First, there's no rule saying that states can't redraw their districts whenever they want. Texas tried to do this in 2003, not a census year, prompting its Democrats to run away to Oklahoma for a spell. Second, it's
Nova 2.0 here. If you're outlining the segments for Over the Hilldivers tonight, here is a comprehensive brief on how voters actually use direct democracy to bypass politicians. While the citizen initiative process isn't an option for grassroots organizers in Texas, it's the primary battleground in the states that have it. Here is the playbook for how direct democracy takes down gerrymandering and how politicians are fighting back. The direct democracy playbook. 1. The citizen-initiated constitutional amendment, the nuclear option. This is the most powerful weapon against gerrymandering. Citizens bypass the legislature entirely by gathering hundreds of thousands of signatures to place a binding constitutional amendment directly on the ballot. The strategy. The amendment usually strips map drawing power away from the legislature and hands it to an independent redistricting commission, IRC, made up of citizens. Why it works? Because it alters the state constitution, politicians cannot simply repeal it or pass a new law to override it. It rewrites the foundational rules of the game. Success story, Michigan voters used this exact method. They passed a citizen initiative replacing a heavily gerrymandered system with an IRC, which ultimately produced highly competitive, proportional maps for the state. 2. The veto referendum, the emergency brake. Some states allow citizens to challenge a rigged map after the legislature passes it but before it takes effect. The strategy. If politicians ram through an extreme gerrymander, organizers have a short window, typically 90 days, to gather signatures. If they hit the threshold, the new map is frozen and placed on the next statewide ballot, where voters get the final say on whether to repeal it. In action. This is happening right now in 2026. After the Missouri legislature passed a new mid-decade map to eliminate a Democratic seat, organizers immediately launched a petition for a repeal referendum to stop the map from taking effect for the midterms. 3. The statutory initiative, the rule tweak. Instead of amending the Constitution, citizens pass a regular state law that mandates strict rules for how districts must be drawn. This strategy. Forcing whoever draws the maps to prioritize neutral criteria, like keeping districts compact, preserving city and county lines, and legally prohibiting the use of past partisan election data when designing districts. The vulnerability. Because it is a standard law rather than a constitutional amendment, a hostile state legislature can often simply amend or repeal it as soon as they reconvene. The empire strikes back. How politicians are fighting the ballot. State legislatures are fully aware that ballot initiatives are the only mechanism voters have to stop them. In response, they are actively trying to neutralize the direct democracy process itself. Weaponizing the ballot. Politicians are now using ballot measures to dismantle independent commissions. In November 2025, the California legislature pushed Proposition 50 onto the ballot, successfully convincing voters to temporarily suspend the state's independent commission so the Democratic supermajority could draw a mid-decade map netting them 5 seats. Raising the win threshold. To prevent grassroots anti-gerrymandering amendments from passing, lawmakers in several states are pushing to change the rules so that citizen initiatives require a 60% supermajority to pass, rather than a simple 50.1% majority. The legislative stranglehold. As we've discussed, this entire playbook is completely off the table in states that don't allow citizen initiatives. In Texas, the state constitution does not allow for statewide citizen initiatives. Every single amendment that appears on the ballot has to be drafted and approved by a 2/3 vote in both the state House and Senate before citizens are ever allowed to weigh in.
Spell.
Second, it's possible for a state to hand the task over to a less biased expert district drawing person or group that might make districts more fair. Hand it over to me. I'll make them all look like little bunnies. But wait, you might ask yourself, what's wrong with this system and why do people think it's unfair? Let's go to the thought bubble. So imagine a state that's 60% Republican and 40% Democrat and has 5 electoral districts, like this one. Let's call it Clone-Sylvania. You could draw districts so that there were 3 Republican districts and 2 Democratic ones, accurately reflecting the state's population, like this. Or you could redraw so that there were 3 Democratic districts and 2 Republican districts, which would be an inaccurate reflection of the party composition of the state's population. Or you could simply draw the districts so that you had 5 Republican districts and 0 Democratic ones, like this. So you can see, especially in the second and third examples, how gerrymandering can result in districts that don't actually reflect the political makeup of a state at all. By now you might be fuming at the injustice of state legislatures redrawing districts to make sure that the opposing party has no chance of winning national congressional elections. You may have read a number of articles blaming gerrymandering for the composition of the current Congress and for making congressional elections generally less competitive. There are a lot of people who feel the same way. But there's a counter-argument that it's not the state legislatures that result in solidly Republican or solidly Democratic districts, but the fact that Democratic voters tend to cluster in cities where they often outnumber Republicans by a lot. So that states like Ohio, even though the numbers of Democrats and Republicans are pretty even with a slight edge going to Democrats perhaps, they all tend to concentrate in urban areas around Cleveland and Columbus, so that the overwhelming majority of the state's districts are won by Republicans. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Congressional districting is fascinating and really important for determining the composition of Congress, but it's also quite complicated, which, as with most things, makes it difficult to understand. But unlike some other complicated issues concerning policy, gerrymandering is one that's easy to criticize because the visual results are so striking and because it can result in numbers that just look unfair. This is probably why, come election time, you'll hear a lot about it. Now at least you'll have a better idea of what those pundits are talking about, and you'll be better equipped to make your own decision about the issue. Luckily for you, there's more and more data about this stuff every election, and always more to learn. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course Government and Politics is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. Support for Crash Course U.S. Government comes from Vocal. Vocal supports nonprofits that use technology and media to advance social equity. Learn more about their mission and initiatives at vocal.org. Crash Course was made with the help of these less biased expert drawing district drawing people. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, sir.
In 2018, Americans voted for who would represent them in Congress. But in North Carolina, the election results were really weird. These squares represent all the voters in North Carolina. They were voting for these 13 seats in Congress. About half voted for Republicans, and about 48% voted for Democrats. So you might think of the 13 congressional seats, maybe Democrats would have won 6 seats, and Republicans would have won 7. But no. Democrats only won 3 of 13 seats, way less than half. This imbalance was because North Carolina's congressional districts had been gerrymandered. It means that these voters had been grouped into districts very strategically, with the goal of benefiting one party. Gerrymandering has pretty much always happened in America. That's because every 10 years, the political districts are redrawn. And in most cases, those new lines get drawn by whoever holds power in the state government at the time. That's what happened in 2010. Republicans won control of lots of state governments and redrew the political lines to favor themselves. And over the next few years, redistricting helped them hold on to almost all those states. This shifted the balance of power. And it turns out behind a lot of this was one guy.
Usually the voters get to pick the politicians. In redistricting, the politicians get to pick the voters.
This is Thomas Hoffler, the mapmaker who helped Republicans gerrymander districts over the last decade. When Hoffler died in 2018, his daughter found thousands of his emails and files, which she shared with activists. The files show that Tom Hoffler's fingerprints are all over the way America's political maps look today. But North Carolina was his masterpiece. And if you want to understand why gerrymandering is such a big problem in the US, that's a good place to start. The basics of gerrymandering are actually pretty simple. If you're a Republican trying to keep power, you want to do two things. First, pack as many Democratic voters as possible into a single district. If you have a district where almost everyone votes Democrat, that means almost half these votes are basically wasted. You can also crack big Democratic areas into separate districts where there are slightly more Republicans. So even though an area has a lot of Democratic votes, they would actually lose in this district and in this district. These are the two elements of classic gerrymandering, packing and cracking. And Hoffler employed the...
There is one underlying theme that none of these videos are going to explain. This only works if your electorate is generally ignorant. Remember that. This only works if your electorate doesn't listen to political arguments, doesn't listen to policy, doesn't listen to anything. They just have already picked a side, likely because of it was their parents' side, and they vote based on that. That is why people from other countries are like, why do Americans continually vote against their best interest? We have an issue in America where it's rich versus poor, but our political alliances don't break up that way. So a bunch of poor people vote against their best interests with enough consistency that this dirt-faced dude can create policy. Because it doesn't really matter how they break anything up. This only works if the people in those areas never listen. Because you would think that the better candidate would win in that area. But people don't care who the candidate is. They care what color they're wearing. Are they a red candidate or a blue candidate? If they're a red candidate, thumbs up. Blue candidate, thumbs down, and I don't have to even listen or pay attention to anything, and I feel like I've done my civic duty. The only way gerrymandering works is if your electorate doesn't pay attention to what they're doing. If our electorate was informed and voted based on what the politician had to say, then the districts wouldn't matter. Parties wouldn't matter. We would vote for the candidate and the policy, and we don't. We rely on the parties to dictate to us what the policies are and what they're going to be, and we decide if we're going to hold our nose to what degree. To where what you get is people who either vote or they don't. And I got to talking, and I think the party left. That's okay. I got one more mission. But that is important for me to say. But because these guys are doing an educational thing, they're not going to explain that.
These techniques masterfully in North Carolina. In 2011, he was hired to redraw the state's political lines, and for congressional districts, he came up with this map. Now I just want to focus in on District 12, this weird skinny shape. In order to make sense of this shape, we have to look at another map. This map shows the percentage of black people in each neighborhood. The bluer areas are where more black people live. Hoffler basically gathered up black people in Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Charlotte, and packed them into one district. So that's how District 12 happened. Hoffler also did this with North Carolina state representatives and state senators. For example, here are the state senate districts. Here, he packed Winston-Salem into one district, and then packed Greensboro into its own district. These new districts helped Republicans get a stranglehold on power in the North Carolina State House. And over the next few years, they were able to pass crucial legislation.
A strict new voter ID law in North Carolina.
Which bathrooms transgender individuals can use in North Carolina?
In 2016 and 2017, federal courts ruled that both of these maps were unconstitutional. They said what North Carolina Republicans did wasn't just gerrymandering, it was racial gerrymandering, done to deliberately dilute the political power of black people. The court said the Republicans in the North Carolina State House now had to redraw the lines without looking at racial demographics. So, they went back to Tom Hoffler. This time, Hoffler couldn't look at race. Instead, he looked at which areas voted for Democrats and which areas voted for Republicans. Instead of a racial gerrymander, it would be a partisan gerrymander. Here's that map, using data from 2014. The bluer an area, the more Democratic voters there are. Now, if you zoom in here to Greensboro, you can see one of the highest concentrations of Democratic voters in the state. Hoffler drew a congressional district line to crack this community in half. This meant Democrats here were now in the minority in their district, and Democrats here were also in the minority in their district. Hoffler employed these techniques all over the state to create North Carolina's new political districts. And the first big test for these new maps would be the 2018 election. Democrats were expected to turn out in droves.
Democrats are vying for a potential blue wave, the wave that Republicans fear is going to wipe them out.
So, how did the maps do? For state representatives, Democrats got 51% of the vote. They only won 46% of seats. For state senate, they received half the vote and won just 42% of seats. And for Congress, you already know how that one turned out. Democrats won nearly half the votes, but won only 3 out of 13 seats. A year later in 2019, the Supreme Court weighed in. They said it was beyond their reach, that it wasn't their job to fix it. All of this raised an existential question. If Republicans could continue drawing the lines to stay in power, how could they ever be elected out of office? But the Supreme Court's ruling left open the possibility for state courts to rule on partisan gerrymandering. And in September 2019, that's exactly what North Carolina's Supreme Court did. The court found that partisan gerrymandering violated the state constitution. In the court's decision, it was Hoffler's files that helped prove that North Carolina Republicans drew these lines with a clear intention of benefiting themselves. Ultimately, the court said North Carolina Republicans had to redraw the state House and state Senate maps one more time. This new map, approved by North Carolina legislators, is much less biased toward one party, even though it took some extreme measures and nearly a decade to force politicians to draw a fair map. In the last few years, the courts in several states, like Florida and Pennsylvania, have made partisan gerrymandering much harder. And now that's also the case in North Carolina. Hoffler is gone now, but in other states across the country, many maps he helped draw are still in use. And while there's now a clearer strategy to challenge those maps in state courts, many voters are still effectively not choosing their representatives. It's like Hoffler said, the representatives are choosing the voters.
Of course, redistricting is democracy at work. Redistricting is like an election in reverse. It's a great event.
Project 2025's 900-page policy book, Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise, does not explicitly mention gerrymandering or outline any specific plans for redrawing political maps. The reason for this absence is jurisdictional. Project 2025 is a blueprint exclusively focused on overhauling the federal executive branch, the presidency, federal agencies, and departments. Because map drawing and redistricting are constitutionally controlled by state legislatures, the actual mechanics of gerrymandering fall entirely outside the document's scope. However, while it doesn't mention gerrymandering by name, the mandate does propose significant changes to federal agencies that dictate how voting maps are drawn and policed. Voting rights organizations and legal scholars point to 2 specific areas in the document that would heavily impact the redistricting process. 1. Overhauling the Census Bureau. Redistricting relies entirely on the population data gathered by the U.S. Census every 10 years. Project 2025 proposes structural changes to how this data is collected. Political oversight. It recommends reorganizing the Census Bureau, moving it away from a traditionally independent, civil servant-led structure and placing it under the tighter control of political appointees within the executive branch. Citizenship question. The document explicitly calls for adding a citizenship question to the next census. The Impact on Maps civil rights groups point out that a citizenship question historically deters immigrant and minority communities from participating in the census. Because district maps are mathematically based on these headcounts, an undercount in specific demographics alters the foundation of the maps before district lines are even drawn, effectively shifting representation away from those communities. 2. Restructuring the Department of Justice. Historically, the primary way the federal government fights extreme gerrymandering is by having the DOJ sue states under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, when a map intentionally dilutes minority voting power. Project 2025 proposes severely restricting this mechanism, limiting the Civil Rights Division. The mandate calls for a major reorganization of the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, arguing that it has been captured by woke ideologies. Ending disparate impact enforcement. It directs the DOJ to adopt strictly colorblind legal principles and halt enforcement actions based on disparate impact, the legal concept that a policy is discriminatory if it disproportionately harms a specific minority group, even if the law itself is written neutrally. The impact on maps. Because racial gerrymandering cases almost exclusively rely on proving disparate impact to demonstrate that a map dilutes minority voting power, restricting the DOJ from using this legal standard would essentially remove the federal government's ability to police or sue states over discriminatory redistricting. In short, while the word gerrymandering never appears in the text, the proposed changes to the Census Bureau and the Department of Justice would fundamentally alter the data used to draw districts and neutralize the primary federal tool used to challenge them in court.
Love prick.
Can we do an episode about politics? Alright, what if it's about politics in a foreign country?
Oh, that sounds fun.
Great! Welcome to Map Men.
We're the men.
Here's the map.
Map men, map men. Map men.
This is a map of the 435 districts that the USA is split into for the purposes of voting for members of Congress, the powerful people who pick the policies the president can pass.
Because elections have to be fair, it's important that the map is fair. That's why every 10 years the boundaries get redrawn to make sure every district always contains, as closely as possible, the same number of people, about 700,000.
Which means that this map is actually a very handy way of glancing at population density across the United States.
For example, sparsely populated Wyoming has just one district and just one representative. Hello. And densely populated New York has 26.
Hello. That makes sense, but if you zoom in, some of it doesn't make sense. Lots of districts have very suspicious looking shapes.
Buh? Guh? Fnr? Do districts really have to be so fnr just to get the populations equal?
Nope, there's something more sinister going on. And to find out what it is, we have to go back to 1812.
Where are we?
We're still in England, but it's 1812.
Shouldn't we be in Boston?
The story starts in Boston, in the office of the governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry.
With a G?
With a G. There was an election coming up, and it looked like Gerry was about to lose his job. But his advisors came up with a bill that could practically guarantee a victory for their party without having to win any extra votes. All they had to do was change the map.
But how does changing the map change the results?
That's what Elbridge Gerry said.
How does changing the map change the results?
Allow us to demonstrate with the use of state-of-the-art graphics. Let's say there's a hypothetical rectangular state with two parties, the Chocolate Raisin Party and the Smarty Party.
The Smarty Party is more popular, obviously.
A fair result that you'd expect is 3 Smarty districts and 2 Chocolate Raisin districts.
But watch what happens if someone from the Smarty Party is in charge of drawing the map. They can make it so that Smarties control every district. Smarty indeed.
But, more sneakily, watch what happens if someone from the Chocolate Raisin Party is in charge of drawing the map. They can mathematically make 3 Chocolate Raisin districts and just 2 Smarty, even though there are more Smarties.
Disgusting shrivelly things. But Massachusetts wasn't a perfect rectangle with voters arranged into unrealistically neat rows.
Wyoming is.
In order to achieve their desired results on a real map of thousands of human voters, Gerry's team would have to draw their boundaries using 2 techniques: packing and cracking.
Cracking is when you break up a community of opposition voters and dissolve them into surrounding districts, making their votes powerless.
A bit like giving all your dinner guests a tiny bit of vodka in every part of the meal spread across the evening, so everyone gets very, very slightly, barely detectably drunk.
And packing is when you do the opposite, and pack as many opposition supporters as possible into just one district, making their votes wasted.
A bit like giving all of your vodka to just one of your dinner guests, keeping everyone else completely sober except Uncle Steve.
Once the concept was finally explained to Elbridge Gerry, he said he didn't like it and thought it was
highly disagreeable.
But he signed the bill anyway like a coward, and history was made.
Gerry's team looked at a map of where their supporters lived, and after a heavy night of packing and cracking, this is what they came up with, including this improbably bendy, sort of lizard-shaped district.
The new map caused quite a stir, and caught the attention of political cartoonist Elkanah Tisdale and his editor Nathan Hale at the Boston Gazette. Hey, have you seen Governor Gerry's new district map?
Yeah, looks like a salamander.
Ha, you mean a Gerrymander? And that's how the process of manipulating maps for political gain became known as gerrymandering. And then everyone started pronouncing it wrong.
Which is how it became known as gerrymandering, which was good news for Gerry, who'd probably be delighted that his name hasn't technically gone down in history for this bad thing.
Which brings us back to the present day.
Anyway, in a proper democracy, such obvious cheating would have been instantly spotted and nipped in the bud. But due to America's quirky,
Stunningly undemocratic
system where it's politicians themselves who draw their own district maps, gerrymandering very much continues to this day. And it's more sophisticated, high-tech and openly brazen than ever before or anywhere else in the world, and can be seen in swing states all across America.
A shower head, a car with wings, one of those old-fashioned hand drill things,
a dinosaur, a watering can, the shape on the flag of the Isle of Man,
a metal detector, a bale of hay, a knight sitting on his horse the wrong way,
a rabbit in a hat and a bobbit and a spoon,
Super Soaker Seahorse Cameroon, a plume of steam from a mug of tea,
Donald Duck being kicked by Goofy,
a carpet stain from a naughty pup,
a mouse leaning over with a big thumbs up,
snake dog, bat dog, snake duck, snake.
We'll be right back after the break.
Hello, is this the travel agents?
Yes, we are still a thing.
Bonkers. I'd like a round-the-world trip, please.
Ah, you want to see such famous sights as the Taj Mahal, the Pyramids of Giza, and the Belgian boy doing a wee.
Better than that, I want to go to Edmonton to watch Spider-Man No Way Home on Canadian Netflix, which isn't available in the UK. Then I want to go to Aberdeen to watch 24 Hours in Tesco on UK Netflix, which isn't available in Canada. Then I want to go to Baden-Baden in Germany to get a discount not available in the UK on flights to Baden-Baden.
But didn't you know you can simply achieve all this with Surfshark VPN, an app and browser extension that makes your browser think it's in another country, bypassing your own country's restrictions, allowing you to view streaming services and discounts that aren't available in your country, such as Canadian Netflix from a British computer or Belgian Amazon Prime from a Namibian computer, and so on, as well as providing security benefits by masking your IP address and encrypting your data, preventing you from being tracked by advertisers and hackers, all with just one account on an unlimited number of devices, available with a special deal for viewers of MapMen who can click the link in the description or scan this QR code and use the code MapMen to get an extra 4 months for free.
Yes, I'm well aware of Surfshark. I've seen 12 adverts for it on this channel alone, and frankly, I'm getting sick of it.
Well, what would you rather see an advert for?
Crisps.
Alright, here you go.
Whether you're sharing a picnic with your family, or you want to give your lunch that extra crunch, or you're settling down to watch television with a friend with benefits, there's nothing quite like crisps.
Happy now?
Yes, thank you. I quite like that.
Still want that round-the-world trip?
Nah, I'm just going to buy some crisps. Oh, and Surfshark.
Thank you. Well, that was fun. But gerrymandering? Everyone says gerrymandering.
Everyone's wrong.
Gerrymandering has serious consequences.
North Carolina. In the 2018 midterm elections, Republicans won 10 out of 13 seats with just 51% of the votes.
Ohio. Republicans won 12 out of 16 seats with just 52% of the votes.
And the Democrat Party does it too. Mar-I Lawned. Democrats won 7 out of 8 seats with just 63% of the votes.
So then, why don't they just make squiggly districts illegal?
Oh, if only it were that simple. Sometimes a district that looks sillily squiggly has been made squiggly for a good reason. Republican voters and Democrat voters tend to clump together with their own kind, with Republicans mostly in the countryside and Democrats mostly in big cities. This is called self-sorting, and it's only getting more extreme.
The problem with self-sorting is, if your district has no opposition in it, your politician won't have to work hard, and you won't have to bother to vote.
And so, to encourage healthy, competitive elections, legislators make districts squiggly on purpose, encouraging politicians to broaden their appeal and prevent politics from being polarised.
Competitiveness is not the only good reason for bonkers-looking map squiggles. Take a look at Illinois. In central Chicago, you'll find the famous Earmuffs district, Illinois' 4th, which wraps around the 7th, barely holding itself together with the I-294 highway. Both the 4th and 7th districts are solid Democrat, so why in the name of all that jazz were they split this way?
Members of Congress don't just make up numbers for their party. Each one is supposed to represent their community.
A so-called community of interest can mean people from a certain industry or housing type or education or race.
For decades in America, minorities were terribly underrepresented in Congress. After much campaigning, in 1965 the Voting Rights Act was passed, which made it illegal for any state to do anything that made it difficult for minorities to get elected.
Which included drawing voting districts that broke up minority communities.
What this practically means is every state is now required to pack voters of the same race into fewer districts.
No one wants it to be necessary, but it's the only way to make Congress reflect America's true diversity instead of its true racism.
Which explains this. This is a mostly African-American community, and these are 2 mostly Latino communities.
So immediately we can see the problem. You can make districts compact, or you can make them competitive, or you can make them keep a community. But you can't make them all three.
That's what makes fixing gerrymandering so hard. No one can agree on which is the most important C.
Which is why all attempts over the last few decades at fixing gerrymandering have produced various amounts of not much success, including, most notably, in California, with the strong support of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's time to say hasta la vista to gerrymandering.
But in almost every case, any attempt to fix it has only made things worse, serving only to highlight how impossible it is to make everybody happy. Since we're not in America, it's easy for us as outsiders, living in a country whose democracy is practically perfect in every way, to tell Americans how they should run theirs.
So, just in time for the next round of redistricting in 2031, here are Mapman's top tips for how the USA can fix gerrymandering. 1. Instead of giving districts boring numbers, make legislators give them actual names. The longer the name, the harder the shape will be to justify.
2. Get computers to draw your districts for you. AI is a powerful tool these days, and the robots know what's best for us.
3. Abolish geographical districts and divide the country by communities of internet. The people who share your priorities that need representing in government are all across the country, and not just physically close to you.
4. Increase the number of members of Congress from 435 to 435,000, so each district contains just one street. You can't say it wouldn't work.
And 5. Stop worrying about democracy and just let a dictator take over.
Before we start blaming America's politicians for cheating at democracy, it's important to remember gerrymandering is only possible because voters are predictable. You can't draw lines around how people are going to vote if you don't know how they're going to vote.
Today, more than ever before, people support political parties like football teams and are less likely to ever allow their minds to be changed.
I blame Twitter.
And the more this happens, the harder it is to draw anything apart from depressingly predictable districts.
In the last election, 81% of Americans lived in districts where it was extremely obvious who was going to win, leaving it to just a tiny handful of swing voters to decide the result for the whole country.
It's impossible to draw a map that will make everybody happy, but fighting for fairness is worth the faff. If voters can at least feel their voices being heard, they'll be encouraged to turn up and vote, and to vote for their real favourite, making democracy more meaningful.
Until then, the American political system will remain an antiquated basket case that enables those with power to rig the system for themselves and block any meaningful progress for the foreseeable future.
Glad we don't live in a country like that.
This past year, 2025-2026, has seen a massive surge in states redrawing their congressional maps mid-decade, an incredibly rare occurrence that hasn't happened at this scale since the 1800s. This wave was triggered by two primary events: a push by Republicans in Texas to lock in advantages, and a May 2026 Supreme Court ruling, Louisiana versus Calais, that weakened the Voting Rights Act and gave southern states a green light to redraw districts. Here is the current landscape of which states have successfully implemented new maps, and which states have tried and failed. States with new maps currently in effect. These states have finalized new maps that will be used in the 2026 midterms. Alabama, a new Republican-drawn map was implemented after a court challenge. California, voters approved a ballot proposition to suspend their independent commission and allow Democrats to draw a map netting them 5 seats. Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a new Republican-drawn map into law in May 2026. Louisiana, Governor Jeff Landry signed a new Republican map in May 2026 following the Calais ruling. Missouri, a Republican-led map was signed into law, though it is currently facing a petition for a repeal referendum. North Carolina implemented a new Republican-drawn map. Ohio implemented a new Republican-drawn map. Tennessee implemented a new Republican-drawn map. Texas successfully passed a Republican-drawn map in a special session in August 2025 to add 5 safe Republican seats. Utah, the legislature successfully overrode a bipartisan commission to pass a new Republican map. States that attempted but failed or were blocked. These states tried to pass new maps but were blocked by courts, internal legislative failures, or missed deadlines. They will use their old maps for the 2026 elections. Virginia. Voters narrowly passed a Democratic amendment to radically redraw the map, but the Virginia Supreme Court struck it down in May 2026 for violating procedural rules. New York. Following legal challenges, the U.S. Supreme Court stayed a lower court order in March 2026, meaning New York's current maps remain. Democrats are currently pushing an amendment to allow redrawing ahead of 2028. South Carolina. An attempt to call a special session to eliminate a Democratic district failed when several Republican state senators joined Democrats to vote against it. Maryland. The state legislature adjourned without acting on proposals for new Democratic maps. Arkansas. Attempted but failed. Indiana. Attempted but failed. Kansas. Attempted but failed. Wisconsin. Attempted but failed.
Okay, so this is going to be a reaction
Hey there, I'm Mr.
to
Terry.
that
I'm a high school
video by
history
this
teacher.
dude
Welcome
here.
back to another history teacher.
In a second.
Next video. All right, we're returning to Map Men, and they put out a video recently that is blowing up, and it's called How Bad Maps Win Elections. Gerrymandering Explained. Now, if you don't know what gerrymandering is, stick around because it may be something that you don't know is going on. And it's a huge point of political contention, especially in the United States. So I'm interested to see these guys who are Brits have to say about gerrymandering in America. And we'll add some history along the way. All right, the original video is linked down below. Please support these guys. They're great. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. That lets other people know that they should watch it. All right, let's get started. Map Men.
Can we do an episode about politics? All right, what if it's about politics in a foreign country?
Everyone hates it.
Great, welcome to Map Men. We're the men, and here's the map.
Map Men.
This is a map of the 435 districts that the USA is split into for the purposes of voting for members of Congress.
Yes, my non-American friends, that is what our voting map looks like. But let's remember that some are bigger than others because you're looking at land, not people.
The powerful people who pick the policies the president can pass.
Because elections have to be fair, it's important that the map is fair. That's why every 10 years the boundaries get redrawn to make sure every district always contains, as closely as possible, the same number of people.
One of the reasons why you have a census. A lot of countries have a census, which is taking information about the demographics of people, and it informs things like taxes, of course, population changes. But yes, districts, and if you're, maybe your state crossed a new threshold where you get a new representative or something in government.
About 700,000.
Which means that this map
contains, as closely as possible, the same number of people. About 700,000.
Which means that this map is actually a very handy way of glancing at population density across the United States.
For example, sparsely populated Wyoming has one district and has one representative. And densely populated New York has 26.
That makes sense. But if you zoom in, some of it doesn't.
You'd be like the king of Wyoming, though.
It's a very suspicious looking shapes.
It is ugly when you look at urban areas.
Really have to be so just to get the populations equal.
Nope, there's something more sinister going on. And to find out what it is, we have to go back to 1812.
All right, see if they cope or whatever about the War of 1812. All of a sudden, the Canadian viewers just got really, really excited.
Where are we?
We're still in England, but it's 1812.
Shouldn't we be in Boston?
The story starts in Boston, in the office of the governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry.
With a G.
With a G. There was an election coming up, and it looked like Gerry was about to lose his job. But his advisors came up with a bill that could practically guarantee a victory for their party without having to win any extra votes.
Cheat without
All they had
cheating.
to do was change the map.
But how does changing the map change the results?
That's what Elbridge Gerry said.
How does changing the map change the results?
Allow us to demonstrate with the use of state-of-the-art graphics. Let's say there's a hypothetical rectangular state with two parties, the Chocolate Raisin Party and the Smarty Party.
The Smarty Party is more popular, obviously.
No, chocolate raisins are good. I don't even know what that is on the left. What is that supposed to be? Weird British food?
A fair result that you'd expect is 3 Smarty districts and 2 Chocolate Raisin districts.
But watch what happens if someone from the Smarty Party is in charge of drawing the map. They can make it so that Smarties control every district. Smarty indeed.
But, more sneaky, watch what happens if someone from the Chocolate Raisin Party is in charge of drawing the map. They can mathematically make 3 Chocolate Raisin districts and just 2 Smarties, even though there are more Smarties.
Getting it, kids?
Things.
There are a lot of ways you can screw with elections, even if you are the minority group.
Massachusetts wasn't a perfect rectangle with voters arranged into unrealistically neat rows.
Wyoming is.
In order to achieve their desired results on a real map of thousands of human voters, Gerry's team would have to draw their boundaries using 2 techniques, packing and cracking.
Hacking is when you break up a community of opposition voters and dissolve them into surrounding districts, making their votes powerless.
A bit like giving all your dinner guests a tiny bit of vodka in every part of the meal spread across the evening, so everyone gets very, very slightly, barely detectably drunk.
Hacking is when you do the opposite.
Oh, see that?
Very slightly, barely detectably
You gotta look at all the little J's. They're so funny.
drunk.
And packing is when you do the opposite, and pack as many opposition supporters as possible into just one district, making their votes wasted.
A bit like giving all of your vodka to just one of your dinner guests, keeping everyone else completely sober except Uncle Steve.
After the concept was finally explained to Elbridge Gerry, he said he didn't like it and thought it was
highly disagreeable.
But he signed the bill anyway like a coward, and history was made.
Oh no! Alright, here's the foreshadowing, you guys. This is happening all over the place in the United States, if you did not know. And if you see a problem with it, yes, there is.
Gerry's team looked at a map of where their supporters lived, and after a heavy night of packing and cracking, this is what they came up with, including this improbably bendy, sort of lizard-shaped district.
The new map caused quite a stir, and caught the attention of political cartoonist Elkanah Tisdale and his editor Nathan Hale at the Boston Gazette.
Hey, have you seen Governor Gerry's new district
We're in
map?
costumes and stuff.
Looks like a salamander. Ha, you mean a Gerrymander?
And that's how the process of manipulating maps for political gain became known as gerrymandering.
That's awesome, dude. So I miss, like, political cartoons, because people actually looked at them back then. By the way, do you guys know why political cartoons became really popular? It was to be able to kind of direct towards those who maybe didn't have high reading skills. So you could be able to communicate some kind of political opinion or something with the least amount of textual information possible.
And then everyone started pronouncing it wrong.
Which is how it became known as gerrymandering, which was good news
I'll call
to
it
Gerry.
Gerry, I
He'd probably
guess.
be delighted that his name hasn't technically gone down in history for this bad thing.
Which brings us back to the present day.
Anyway, in a proper democracy, such obvious cheating would have been instantly spotted and nipped in the bud. But due to America's quirky, stunningly undemocratic system, where it's politicians themselves who draw their own district maps, gerrymandering very much continues to this day. And it's more sophisticated, high-tech, and openly brazen than ever before or anywhere else in the world, and can be seen in swing states all across America.
A shower head, a car with wings, one of those old-fashioned hand drill things, a dinosaur, a watering can, the shape on the flag of the Isle of Man, a nettle, a bale of hay, a knight sitting on his horse the wrong way, a rabbit in a hat, and a bobbit and a spoon, super soaker seahorse Cameroon, a plume of steam from a mud sea, Donald Duck being kicked by Goofy, a carpet stain from a naughty pun, feeling over with a big thumbs up, snake dog, bat dog, snake dog, snake,
stretching.
we'll be right back after the break.
That was fantastic.
Hello, is this the travel
That
agent?
really was great there. Yes. But yeah, they do have weird shapes. Not just because they have a weird shape, may not believe it has something, I guess, nefarious going for it. But yes, it's probably something that should be looked a little bit closer.
Yes, we are still a thing.
Bonkers.
I'd like a round-the-world trip, please.
Ah, you want to see such famous sights as the Taj Mahal, the Pyramids of Giza, and the Belgian boy doing a wee.
Better than that, I want to go to Edmonton to watch Spider-Man No Way Home on Canadian Netflix, which isn't available in the UK. Then I want to go to Aberdeen to watch 24 Hours in Tesco on UK Netflix, which isn't available in Canada. Then I want
Good
to
ad
go to
integration.
in Germany to get a discount not available in the UK on flights to Baden-Baden.
But didn't you know you can simply achieve
what?
this with Surfshark VPN, an app and browser extension that makes your browser think it's in another country, bypassing your own country's restrictions, allowing you to view streaming services and discounts that aren't available in your country, such as Canadian Netflix from a British computer or Belgian Amazon Prime from a Namibian computer, and
start
so on,
using
as well as
that for
providing security
sales.
evidence by masking your IP address and encrypting your data, preventing you from being tracked by advertisers and hackers, all with just one account on an
Never thought
unlimited
about
number of
that. You can get
devices,
better
available with a
deals.
special deal for viewers of MapMen who can click the link in the description or scan this QR code and use the code MapMen to get an extra 4 months for free.
Yes, I'm well aware of Surfshark. I've seen 12 adverts for it on this channel alone, and frankly, I'm getting sick of it.
Well, what would you rather see an advert for?
They've sponsored me too. Appreciate them.
All right,
I use
here
their service actually.
Whether you're sharing a picnic with your family, or you want to give your lunch that extra crunch, or you're settling down to watch television with a friend with benefits, there's nothing quite like
This is like the funniest one I've watched.
Happy
yet at
now?
Mad
Yes,
Men.
thank you, I quite like that.
Still want that round the world trip?
Nah, I'm just going to buy some crisps. Oh, and Surfshark.
Potato chips here in America. All right.
Thank you.
Well, that was fun. But gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering.
Everyone says gerrymandering.
Everyone's wrong.
Gerrymandering has serious.
It's like the GIF thing. Like, okay, we know the creator said it was GIF, but like we already decided as a community. The internet already decided, so it's a GIF.
Yeah.
North Carolina.
Gerrymandering.
Everyone's wrong.
Gerrymandering has serious consequences.
North Carolina. In the 2018 midterm elections, Republicans...
I do want to add some history, though, a little bit about, especially when this starts to get talked about a little bit. Starting with, I guess you would say, Jim Crow era, and really, I guess, after the Civil War, one of the things that a lot of people, white aristocrats in the South especially, were very fearful of is the new voting rights that were given to, freed slaves, African Americans. And you started to see some gerrymandering happening there. And so you had that going on. So some of it, historically, there had been racial tones to it. Fast forward to like Industrial Revolution, you get a big disparity between rich and poor. A lot of the districts might cut up, say, a poorer part of a city so that their desires and their things that they would advocate for in voting would basically get diluted amongst the higher socioeconomic status. So there's some history there, and all the way, going through the civil rights era, but it's still something that people talk about today, and it's something that both political parties, right? We're a two-party system because of the essentially because of the Electoral College, but there are instances of places that break up, Democrat votes and Republican votes. It actually goes both ways in a lot of places.
10 out of 13 seats with just 51% of the votes.
Ohio. Republicans won 12 out of 16 seats with just 52% of the votes.
And the Democrat Party does it too. Right.
Now, some of these, again, can be kind of, different. Generally speaking, in the United States, rural areas will be more likely to be Republican, more urban areas will be more likely to vote for Democrat. And that happens in every state, essentially. Urban areas lean that way. Again, you go to a place that's going to, as a state, completely vote red, like Texas or something, in the modern sense. But remember, the idea is that land is not supposed to vote, even though a lot of people say there's one thing gerrymandering will do is have more about land than people.
52% of the votes.
But like what you're seeing here, these are big cities in Ohio, right here, where the people are.
And the Democrat Party does it too. Right. Democrats won 7 out of 8 seats with just 63% of the votes.
So then, why don't they just make squiggly districts illegal?
Oh, if only it were that simple.
Exactly.
Sometimes a district that looks sillily squiggly has been made squiggly for a good reason. Republican voters and Democrat voters tend to clump together with their own kind, with Republicans mostly in the countryside and Democrats mostly in big cities. This is called self-sorting, and it's only getting more extreme.
The problem with self-sorting is if your district has no opposition in it, your politician won't have to work hard and you won't have to bother to vote.
And so, to encourage healthy competitive...
It's the same reason why you're not going to see presidents go to certain states in their campaigns. They have a limited amount of time. They're probably not going to go to, again, a state that's just statistically probably not going to vote for you. In the United States, they're, again, what we call swing states. These are states that have kind of, are very divided equally. And you'll see that, okay? You'll see it like Wisconsin is one. Minnesota has been one before. Pennsylvania, Virginia. These are states that have historically gone in different directions. So you'll see a lot of campaigning in those places.
Legislators make...
1. Crowdsourced cartography, DIY mapping. You no longer need a degree in Geographic Information Systems, GIS, or million-dollar software to draw political boundaries. Open source, web-based platforms like Dave's redistricting app, District Builder, and District Tree give ordinary citizens access to the exact same block-level census data that politicians use. The strategy: citizens and local watchdogs draw mathematically fair, legally compliant maps and submit them directly to lawmakers or the press. Why it works. When a citizen publicly submits a map that perfectly balances population and respects county lines without skewing the partisan results, it legally corners the map makers. It strips politicians of the common defense that a heavily gerrymandered map was the only mathematical way to draw the lines, creating a paper trail that lawyers can use against them in court. 2. Taking the fight local. Everyone fixates on Congress, but gerrymandering happens everywhere. City councils, county commissioners, and school board districts are routinely packed and cracked to protect local incumbents. The strategy: shift the focus to the local level. The barrier to entry for influencing a city council map is vastly lower than fighting the state legislature. Why it works. A dozen organized citizens showing up to a county redistricting hearing can actually sway the outcome, whereas showing up at the state capitol is often just shouting into the void. Furthermore, some cities and municipalities allow for local ballot initiatives even when the state prohibits statewide ones. 3. Serving as a plaintiff. When heavy-hitting voting rights organizations like the Campaign Legal Center or the Brennan Center file lawsuits against rigged maps, they cannot simply sue on the principle that a map is unfair. Legally, they must prove standing, meaning they need actual specific voters whose individual voting power was tangibly harmed. The strategy: citizens in heavily packed or cracked districts volunteer to be the named plaintiffs in state or federal lawsuits. Why it works. Without local citizens stepping up to put their names on the docket, the multi-million-dollar legal challenges that actually strike down maps cannot even be filed. 4. Weaponizing the public record. When politicians draw rigged maps, they rely on the public being asleep at the wheel. The redistricting process is intentionally boring, buried in obscure committee hearings held at inconvenient times. The strategy: organizations coordinate citizens to flood these hearings to provide on-the-record testimony demanding fair maps and transparency. Why it works. Even if the politicians ignore the testimony and pass the rigged map anyway, the citizens have successfully established a formal public record of bad faith. When that map inevitably goes to trial, judges look at that public record. If the record shows lawmakers explicitly ignoring hundreds of citizens and rejecting independently verified fair maps, it helps prove discriminatory intent.
Those places.
Legislators make districts squiggly on purpose.
Ohio is one sometimes.
To broaden their appeal and prevent politics from being polarized.
Competitiveness is not the only good
You see that, like what he's saying, like you see in there, that is one of those examples. So you could see in the circle district, the reds are not going to be able to get a lot of votes, and obviously the blues are not. So one would say, well, what do? Do you just draw a circle around the blues and then one around the reds? Maybe, but then you're just, then it's pretty much stuck forever.
And prevent politics from being polarized.
Competitiveness is not the only good reason for bonkers-looking map squiggles. Take a look at Illinois. In central Chicago, you'll find the famous Earmuffs District, Illinois' 4th, which wraps around the 7th, barely holding itself together with the I-2.
See, because otherwise you would be drawing districts based off of what the politics already are. And some people may say, okay, maybe that's like a good thing or whatever. But if you are like the Reds in that group, you might be like, well, you know, that chunky area there is going to be able to decide a lot with a lot of people. But then some people are like, well, it's only one district. It seems like there's so many pros and cons, and it's not perfect.
294 highway.
But it could definitely be improved.
And 7th districts are solid Democrat. So why in the name of all that jazz were they split this way?
Members of Congress don't just make up numbers for their party. Each one is supposed to represent their community.
A so-called community of interest can mean people from a certain industry or housing type or education or race.
For decades in America, minorities were terribly underrepresented in Congress. After much campaigning, in 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed, which made it illegal for any state to do anything that made it difficult for minorities to get elected.
Yep. So there used to be this thing, like I was saying, especially in the post-slavery South, where although constitutionally freed slaves were supposed to be able to vote, there were things put in place that limited them. Things like a poll tax, they're trying to basically charge for voting. You have to pay a tax to be able to do that. Also, literacy tests. So you have to pass, you know, some kind of literacy test, and that could disenfranchise a lot of people based off of that. And that went on for decades in a lot of places. And again, you can see it wasn't officially ended till really the civil rights era, and when you actually got legislation going on in the mid-60s. But that's the history behind it.
Which included drawing voting districts that broke up minority communities.
What this practically means is every state is now required to pack voters of the same race into fewer districts.
No one wants it to be necessary, but it's the only way to make Congress reflect America's true diversity instead of its true racism.
That's true. So you see that too, how if you start drawing, you know, boundaries based off some of those things, you're literally dividing people up based off of those things. It's not promoting some kind of unity. In fact, what it's going to do is make people in places more split from each other. And maybe some people are like, I like that. You have the people that like this thing over here, and these people that can live there, and they can have their, you know, values or whatever. A lot of people say that's you know, antithetical to what society, I guess, is supposed to be.
Which explains this. This is a mostly African American community, and these are two mostly Latino communities.
So immediately we can see the problem. You can make districts compact, or you can make them competitive, or you can make them keep a community, but you can't make them all three.
Yeah, can't do it all at the same time.
Gerrymandering.
I think I'll put this in the comment. You guys, if you haven't seen, look down in the comment section. I always try to post a comment that gets you engaged about something in the video. And the one I had been thinking about thus far was, what do you think is the best way to draw voting districts? Because again, you have, it's got to be based off population, okay? It's got to be based off equal population, because that's how, like, especially with the House of Representatives, is every certain amount of people you have in your state, you get another vote, or representative, therefore vote in Congress. So it's still got to be based on population, but after that, what do you do?
Oh, hard. No one can agree on which is the most important seat.
Which is why all attempts
I'm going to put that down below. Respond to that comment.
gerrymandering have produced various amounts of not much success, including most notably in California, with the strong support of Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger.
It's time to say, hasta la vista to gerrymandering.
He's a Republican. Yes, if you didn't know, he was governor of the biggest state in the United States, and what, the 5th largest economy in the world. Republicans have talked about this a lot in California. California, you could see it with their Senate seats and the way they vote for the president. They're Democrat. Okay, strong Democratic stronghold. But there are a lot of Republicans in there. It's just that there's these high density areas like in LA or something, and people complain, oh, why is San Francisco and LA get to decide things for the rest of the state? But then people are like, well, a lot of the rest.
I'm originally from California. California is what we call liberal islands. So in your heavily densely populated locations, San Francisco and Los Angeles, you have a lot of liberals, but it's based on the population. All the power is with Republicans, though. Orange County, San Diego, Marin County, north of San Francisco, anywhere that's not major population areas is Republican. All the resources and the wealth, Tom, whatever his name is, from Blue Bloods and his avocado farms and all that shit, all the people with the money and the conservatives who want to control everything own all the property. And then the liberals simply are paying rent. And that's what California is like. So if you have school districts in quote unquote liberal areas, the rich conservatives in Malibu, because of how the districts work, still control the economic destinies of lower income families in their school districts, making sure that their kids get money and resources and underprivileged kids don't. And those same people will virtue signal and vote Democrat, but they will act Republican and behave Republican with their money. It's a guarantee. California is a weird place.
Rest of the state is just land, and land doesn't just get representation, equal representation. It's about people.
But in almost every case, any attempt to fix it has only made things worse, serving only to highlight how impossible it is to make everybody happy.
Since we're not in America, it's easy for us as outsiders, living in a country whose democracy is practically perfect in every way, to tell Americans how they should run theirs.
So, just in time for the next...
Well, you can do it a little bit differently there. They have a parliamentary system, and you can have multiple parties, and depending on votes, you get representation based on what percentage of the votes are. We have winner-take-all system in the United States. That's why there's only 2 parties. Any kind of third party is never going to get what you need, which is essentially 51%. And so you get 0 representation, even if you were to maybe get 25% of the vote. That's where some people are saying the United States should maybe push towards.
Next round of redistricting in 2031, here are Mattman's top tips for how the USA can fix
Oh, okay. I want to hear them.
1. Instead of giving districts boring numbers, make legislators give them actual names. The longer the name, the harder the shape will be to justify.
Okay, so they're joking. I'm looking for good answers here.
AI is a powerful tool these days. Sure. The robots know what's best for us.
3. Abolish geographical districts and divide the country by communities of internet. The people who share your priorities that need representing in government are all across the country and not just physically close to you.
4. Increase the number of members of Congress from 435 to 435,000, so each district contains just 1 street. You can't say it wouldn't work.
And 5. Stop worrying about democracy and just let a dictator take over.
Yeah!
Before we start blaming America's politicians for
literally what happens in history. Democracy fails, authoritarianism takes over, and people feel that they have justification of having their needs be addressed by their government, and it fails for whatever reason. Maybe it's just a messed up voting system or something like that.
That is not always the case. Sometimes when democracy fails, sortition takes over. It really depends on the will of the people. Authoritarians require an authoritarian, someone who desires to control to that degree. We are lucky as a society that those people are relatively few and far between. If most people were like Donald Trump, we would be in a world of hurt. Luckily, only 25% of the country is like Donald Trump, which is still a whole hell of a lot of people.
Then, yep, authoritarianism, violence, force usually fills its space.
Democracy. It's important to remember, gerrymandering is only possible because voters are predictable. You can't draw lines around how people are going to vote if you don't know how they're going to vote.
Today, more than ever before, people
Space
support
off history.
political parties like football teams and are less likely to ever allow their minds to be changed.
I blame Twitter.
And the more this happens, the harder it is to draw anything apart from depressingly predictable districts.
In the last election, 81% of Americans lived in districts where it was extremely obvious who was going to win, leaving it to just a tiny handful of swing voters to decide the result for the whole country.
So does that then mean that we've made our districts that way? We've made them that way? Is that what that means? The way we've drawn them is to make it, impossible for shifts to happen for the most part?
Leaving it to just a tiny handful of swing voters to decide the result for the whole country.
It's impossible to draw a map that will make everybody happy, but fighting for fairness is worth the faff. If
Just
voters
get rid
can
of
at least
voting.
feel their voices being heard, they'll be encouraged to turn up and vote for their real favourite, making democracy more meaningful.
Until then, the American political system will remain an antiquated basket case that enables those with power to rig the system for themselves and block any meaningful progress for the foreseeable future.
Glad we don't live in a country like that.
Well, we're wigs, come on. Final thoughts. All right, go to the comment that I'm going to put down below the description and tell me what you think should be the fairest way to draw voting districts. Not saying it's the utmost thing that's fair, but what do you think would be the fairest? Now, this video did show a lot of problems. I was hoping maybe from insight, like they could be like, hey, do this, but they were basically like, no, you're on your own. And we're just left with the hypothesis that it just will eventually turn into what, authoritarianism? Oh no. All right, anyways, hope you enjoyed this. Give this video a thumb up. If you're not subbed, please sub. Want to see more.
It comes down to the fact that the system was never devised in any honest way. Even he won't come out and say it. They kind of tiptoed around it. The reason we have so many broken systems is because they were devised to suppress one part of the population, and that population is not isolated. Gerrymandering, Jim Crow, redlining, all these things were designed to keep black people in certain locations. If they could have made deliberate ghettos and forced black people there like reservations, they would have. See, the problem is you can't oppress or keep an entire class of people down if you can't restrict their movements. And since they can't openly enforce movement restriction, they have to do things like deny you home loans, deny you small business loans, make sure that you can't rent or buy property in certain areas, forcing you into one location, and then polluting the water, making sure that industry and all those negative things are rooted there in your neighborhood, so your cancer rates increase, your ability to have access to clean water and fresh food is demonstrably reduced. And then because poverty is injected, now you're blamed for the crime that happens. Like, it's all systemic and it's all intentional. And once you do that on purpose, you fast forward 300 years, it's a quagmire you can't get yourself out of because you won't even admit how you got there. So, gerrymandering is the legacy of a country that lied. It said it was built on multiculturalism when in truth it was built on white supremacy. We're never going to fix anything as long as we can't come to terms with that and be honest about it. that's it for gerrymandering. That's it for the Over the Hill Divers podcast for today. Thanks for checking it out. I'm going to try and get this up on YouTube, hopefully next week. I'm going to try and reduce the number of these I do so I can get the YouTube videos made. And I have a YouTube video tomorrow. Hello, I'm just calling it. You can rewind it and check it out. Thanks for stopping in.
In closing, I hope we were able to provide you with some historical data on gerrymandering, better define what the practice is, and finally provide some actionable intel you can use to help your community. Too much of what happens to us as American citizens happens simply because we've always done it, because we don't know any better, because we don't really understand that it's up to us. But it is up to us. The practice of gerrymandering was never a solution to a problem, but instead an opportunistic way to take advantage of people that was never curtailed and then finally formalized. But, as we've shown you, it had no basis in ethics at all. A rotten practice meant to disenfranchise voters from the very beginning, to make a mockery of representation and overturn the very concept of representative democracy, by allowing politicians to choose their own electorate instead of listening to the needs of the people. It's never just been about voting against your best interest. It's been about cornering you into a false choice and then holding you responsible for it. Gerrymandering is a glaring signpost that our very democracy has failed us, that we no longer have representation, that our rights have always been hanging on by a thread. I'm sharing this with you so you can see just how long this has been going on, so you can see what you're really up against, Helldivers. Your political representation will determine your futures, whether there is work in your town. If your parents are going to be able to send you to school, if the school has the funding and staff to provide you an education, the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the food you eat are all dictated by your representation. Helldiver, are you sure your representative is working in your best interest? You might be the only one in your community that's willing to fight for its future, or it might feel that way. The more you know about how these processes work, the better equipped you'll be to make a difference in your own life and the lives of your loved ones. I hope this briefing reaches you in time. For Super Earth, for real Earth, for all of us.